Welcome to Tara's Heal program. Today we are here with Taji to talk about radical acceptance and what it means and how it can help survivors heal. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Taji. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm Dr. Taji. I'm a licensed clinical social worker with over 2 decades of experience working with people who have experienced trauma.
Dr. Taji, what do you think are the barriers a survivor faces in just accepting who they are and where they are in this journey, and how can they get past these barriers?
Trauma rewires the brain. Once that happens, those neurons, those pathways become entrenched in us. It's a learned behavior. Just because it has been learned does not mean it cannot be unlearned. We can develop strategies that help the crisis of memory that trauma brings. Because trauma has changed the brain, it has touched our core belief. The belief of worthiness and lovability has been deeply impacted when we are robbed of our sense of self. To regain that, we start with practices that acknowledge these are untrue statements about ourselves. We are lovable. We are worthy because we are human.
Would you think the refusal to accept is a coping mechanism for someone who has been through trauma like this?
Absolutely. I believe that it's easy to deny. Denial is one of our greatest ego strengths. Living in denial is a protective factor. When we reach acceptance, that is when we shed the coat of denial and we decide that we are ready to broach our healthiness.
So what do you think is a behavior pattern in your experience that you often see in survivors once they've been through trauma like this?
The sad, unfortunate behaviors that manifest in a person who has survived trauma include dissociation. That's when a person has what they feel like is an out-of-body experience. So they can be in a classroom around lots of people, but tune out in a way that they almost feel like they're underwater. And sometimes they'll re-emerge and not know exactly what was happening in the conversation. That's one of the greatest symptoms that I see. I also see social isolation. And this is a major problem because survivors feel like they are inadequate. And when we start to rob ourselves of these social connections, those pathways get firmly entrenched in our minds, making it more difficult to heal. So we want to acknowledge that we need to be in a social atmosphere that is safe, that is healthy, that is welcoming.
How would you suggest a survivor can break these patterns and get out of these norms of behavior that are seen?
Well, as a mental health professional, I would first say therapy. But there are lots of barriers to that. You don't have to receive therapy to begin on a self-help journey. You can start discussing things with friends, with family, finding local organizations to belong to. Belonging is key in the healing practice. It allows us to reduce depression, eradicate any suicidal ideation, or any other negative beliefs of feeling like an outsider. So you can do that in places of worship, education, with friends, or neighborhood organizations that promote altruism. Altruism is the act of doing good for others. This is incredibly healing for the person who has experienced trauma. It's one of the greatest ways we can mend our broken hearts. In my practice, how I've introduced radical acceptance has been with a very gentle approach. We begin with discussing what happened to the person. And as the person describes their experience, we allow them to experience all of the feelings, whether they begin to feel anxiety or anger or nervousness. That is natural when you start on this healing journey. One of the practices that I've had with one of my patients has been to journal. We begin journaling so that radical acceptance feels comfortable for us. Journaling allows you to say, this is what I was, and here is where I'm going. It's an excellent marker for your journey. You can see each day your progress. It also allows you to feel comfortable with days that you struggle and days that you are successful. You can have both. You do not fail if you cannot do it on one day versus another. This is a journey that requires consistency, patience, and self-love.
So you mentioned shifting focus to things that are in your control. How do you think a survivor can shift focus to what's in their control and in their power, and how will that help them in their journey?
One of the most simple practices that I practice each day is making my bed. That is something I am fully in control of.
So if a survivor is just beginning her healing journey, what would be your advice for someone in that position?
I would congratulate you and welcome you to this healing space and ask that you be gentle with yourself as you begin on this road. One of the first things I would encourage someone to do is to begin to honor the experience that they've had. You can do this in a variety of ways. You can acknowledge it in your mind. You can discuss it with a friend. You can write it in a journal. The important piece is to say, this is what happened. Once you say that, you realize there's no timeline, there's no judgment, there's no demand for you to get over it. We are seeking to turn down the volume on the extreme loudness that trauma can impact you with. Radical acceptance began from a psychologist back in the 80s by the name of Marsha Linehan. She found this practice after visiting a Buddhist monk. She learned that the Buddhist practice says, release everything, attach to nothing. And she brought this back to the States and applied it to folks who have experienced trauma. Because if you are able to detach, then you are able to heal. If you find yourself struggling mightily with overwhelming emotions, you are not failing. You are learning. This is a process. There is no shame in struggling. This is a difficult space to be in. So be gentle with yourself as you move along.
You mentioned journaling as a tool for self-help. Are there any other tools that you could recommend to someone in this position?
Yes, absolutely. There are lots of ways that one can approach healing. Journaling is safe, it's easy, it's private. So I encourage that first. But there are other ways that a person can approach healing. Through nature, so walking, being in touch with the sun on your skin, the wind at your back is incredibly grounding for people who have experienced trauma. Moreover, you can develop a practice of mindfulness. You can do that through meditation, yoga, or even something as simple as coloring in a mandala notebook. Affirmations are an incredible way to develop positive self-talk. And it's as simple as, I like the way I smile. I like that I am kind. And it's as simple as you can put a post-it on a mirror or in a compact, just so you have that daily reminder of how wonderful you truly are. Morning grounding allows you to set the tone for the day, setting the intention and saying, no matter what comes throughout this day, I will be present. Practice of here and now is a grounding exercise that brings you connected to the present moment. You take a deep breath, hold it, and expel like you're blowing out a candle. That simple exercise immediately brings you into focus and into the present. Allowing negative emotions to emerge and be able to cope with them is an essential part to healing. When they do emerge, some practices that you can engage in to relieve either a headache or feeling jittery and overwhelmed, or perhaps a bellyache, is tapping. And so tapping is simply done by gently touching different points of your body. This resets your nervous system and allows you to say, I'm not in danger. You're telling your brain you are the boss of it. Your emotions are okay. Good, bad, ugly, beautiful. They're all okay.
Can you describe some physical and maybe even mental changes that a survivor will go through or experience once they actually reach radical acceptance?
Absolutely, because there are so many different aspects of trauma. There is the physical portion, there is the mental portion, there is the emotional and spiritual portion. When a person starts to step onto the healing journey, they are then able to feel lighter. You notice they smile more. They're more conversational. They giggle at simple jokes. They're able to find a lighter way of walking. They hold their bodies in a different way. They don't complain of headaches or belly aches as much. They feel fulfilled.
Thank you, Dr. Taji, for your time today and for touching upon radical acceptance. I hope we all can take away something about the journey and the healing process and how important it is to accept where we are in the journey. Thank you.
I am grateful to be part of this journey with Tara. I think this work is incredibly important towards healing survivors and empowering them over their lives after experiencing trauma. I don't know of any other program quite like this. It's dynamic in its approach to healing, empowering, and saving lives.